In this video, I'm going to show you how I built my backyard fence and saved over half the cost compared to a professional install. The first and most critical step of building a fence is knowing exactly where your property lines are. You should have physical pin markers at the corners of your property line. I searched my county records for a site plan of my address and found a detailed diagram of my lot. It showed where the corners of my property were in relation to the home and certain features on the street. This gave me a rough idea of where the physical marker pins would be. I dug around in those locations until I found them. Once I got them all exposed, I was able to use them as a guide to string out the exact placement of the fence. I used a long tape measure to mark out 8-foot sections on the string with some tape. These marks are where the fence posts will go. This allowed me to easily calculate how many posts I would need for the whole project. Once I got all the posts marked out, I added some visual references to the ground to make it easier to see while digging the post holes. I had 41 holes to dig, which I was not excited about. I briefly thought about hand digging all of them, but quickly abandoned that idea. I looked around town for other options. I found Home Depot's rental page and grabbed a hydraulic auger. You can rent these by the half or full day. They fold up to attach to a hitch so you can tow them home from the store. This thing was the absolute MVP of the entire project. We got all 41 holes knocked out in 2 hours and were able to get it back in time for the half-day rate. This thing is pretty heavy, so you may want an extra hand to help you move it around the yard. I did have to clean up a few of the holes by hand since our soil is mostly clay and rock, but this was so much better than trying to dig all of them from scratch. I dug all of the holes at least 2 feet down. Then I laid out the posts and concrete bags for each one, making sure none of the posts had any major splits or defects. I set all of the corner posts and then ran some string between them as a guide. I offset the string by about 2 inches. I'll explain why that spacing is important in just a minute. To set each post, I filled the bottom of the hole with a few inches of rock for drainage. That will help keep water off the ends of the post to increase their strength and lifespan. I highly recommend using quick setting concrete here. It was a little bit more expensive per bag, but it set up fast enough that I didn't need to use any post braces while waiting for it to dry. I simply dumped the bag into the hole, spread it around evenly, and then had my helper pour the water into the hole. By the time I mixed it up a little with a stick and checked the post for plumb on 2 sides, it was already hard enough to support itself. Here's where you can see how the offset string comes into play. I was able to set each post in a perfect line without physically touching the string by measuring from the string to each post. If I set each post directly on the string, one of them might have accidentally pushed the string out too much, which would skew the line for all the rest. After all the posts were set, I came back and tamped in the loose dirt to even up the ground and prevent rainwater from pooling at the base of the posts. Next, it was time to attach the stringers between each post. I made a jig out of some scrap to mark where the top and bottom stringers would be to keep their height consistent. Might have been a little overkill, but I really wanted everything to be as consistent as possible. The stringers are 8-foot 2x4s and are attached with deck screws. Some of the sections came up slightly shorter than 8 feet, and I trimmed the stringers as needed. I'd rather be a tad short here than too long. Having to pay for a 10 or 12-foot board and cutting it down to just over 8 feet would be wasteful. Then I made another marking board for the middle stringers and got them all attached. Unfortunately, I didn't get it on film, but I did end up coming back with a saw to chop off the extra portion at the top of each post. Next, I began attaching the pickets to the outer side of the fence. I started by placing one picket centered over each post. I used a 2 or 3 foot section of 2x4 at the bottom to make sure the spacing at the bottom was even and tall enough to keep the bottom of the pickets away from wet soil. Now that the post pickets were set, I ran some string across the tops and stapled them into place. This allowed me to line up the tops of all the pickets in between and help make the fence look nicer. If you haven't noticed, I really like using string. Then it was time to set the rest of the pickets. I see the fence guys throwing these things up just eyeballing the gaps between each picket, and I know if I tried that, it would look terrible. I came up with a plan to calculate how wide the spacing should be for each section by doing the following. First, I decided how many pickets would be in each section, not counting the end ones. Next, I multiplied the number of pickets by their width to give me the total amount of space they take up. Then, I subtracted the total picket width from the total distance between the 2 end pieces, which left me with the total amount of gap space. Divide that by the number of gaps, and that gave me the measurement for each individual space. I wasn't about to take a tape measure and measure out each individual gap. That would take forever. I made spacer guides by ripping down a few defective pickets to various widths. After doing the math in each section, I just grabbed the spacer picket that was closest to the number I needed. I placed the spacer on the fence and butted the next picket up to it, checking for plumb every so often. Again, it might seem like overkill, but I really think it made a huge difference in the overall look of the fence. Walking around the neighborhood, you can see exactly where people got lazy or messed up the spacing a little bit. This is something I'm going to look at every day for years, so I wanted to take the time and get it right. The process was pretty much the same for the inside of the fence. I started by attaching the end pickets next to each post and running a string along the tops. I found that starting in the middle of the section, using the opposite side as a guide, and working my way towards the end helped even out any inconsistencies in the spacing. Then it was time to move on to the gates. I set this opening a little wider than 4 feet just to accommodate any larger equipment I might need to get in the backyard in the future. To start, I cut 2 side pieces out of 2x4s and strapped them to the end posts using single fence pickets on their side as spacers to leave a little gap. This made sure that there was room for the gate to open and close once it was framed out. I cut more 2x4s for the top, bottom, and middle and secured them in place temporarily with some toenails. I ended up securing these a little bit better with some screws sent in at an angle. This gate definitely needs cross-bracing support, or it would sag and come out of alignment very quickly. I marked and cut some bracing and secured it with more screws. It's important to note that the bracing should span from the top of the latch side to the bottom of the hinge side. It helps transfer the load properly to avoid the sagging issues. There's probably a much easier way to do this, but this is definitely one way. After the gate frame was complete, I supported it in place with some blocks and attached the hinges. It might look weird, but you're going to have double pickets on the hinge side and latch side where the gate meets the fence. It's the only way to get the gate hinge properly installed. I ended up changing the hinges later on. They were from Harbor Freight and they just weren't quite heavy duty enough for this gate. Unfortunately, the big box stores were out of the bigger hinges and I didn't really want to wait on Amazon. I got the latch on and adjusted and finished off the last of the pickets. And that's it. This fence is complete and now I can let my kids and dogs go crazy without worrying about anyone wandering off. And although I was glad to be finished, I really did enjoy this build. It's something I get to look at and be proud of every single day. Thanks for watching this video. I've got tons more content on the way, so be sure to drop back in and check it out. We'll see you on the next one.